Timeline. 1847 was the town of Verona was established. 1833, I like to start there. That's when Town 6 North, Range East West was surveyed and staked out. That would become Verona, but this is what it was called. So depending how far back you go. The first white settlers, Stuart and Young, came here in 1840, dug a hole in the side of a hill. That same year, our first log cabin was built. The Matz family, there they come, on their wagon, 1844. The Matz family comes from Pennsylvania. And then 1845, Josiah purchased the east half of downtown from the cemetery north all the way down to Badger Mill Creek, a little bit past it. And then 1848-ish, we think, is about when the Matz house was built. And let's talk about that. So here we are, there's Lydia. We don't have a picture of Josiah, but Lydia was his wife who came all the way. She lived in, the last name was Flick. She lived in Flicksville, Pennsylvania, and Josiah lived in Matz Hill. So they both had, so that kind of makes us think they probably had resources, probably a fair amount of money. They had towns named after them, and they made this travel for about 2 or 3 months in a wagon all the way to Verona, Wisconsin. And I mean, I've been on plane rides for like 6 hours, and I feel torturous. I don't know if anyone's taken a 3-month wagon ride and been pregnant when they did it. But Lydia was pregnant with Horace, their second kid. They brought their 4-year-old William GL along with them, and he comes up a lot later. So she made this trip with a baby on board, which pretty amazing, yeah.
How old was she at the time of the trip?
Oh my goodness. I feel like high 20s, young 30s. How old was she was the question? I can't remember, I think 20s. She had met, Josiah was a school teacher. He was an invalid as a kid. We're not sure why, but he was a school teacher. Doesn't seem like he liked it very much. She was one of his students. They met, and then they married, had William GL, and then moved out here. So I'm not exactly sure. Oh, she was younger than this picture. Yeah, interesting question. That's a good one for me to, I could figure that out pretty easily. I just gotta look at her. So here was that land purchase. You'll recognize this as the east half of downtown. There's the Matz house. This is an 1890 plat map. All the way up to the cemetery, all the way down to the creek. This is the land they got. His brother-in-law got the same thing, but on the west side. And this is kind of one of those fun Verona historic family connections, where here's Josiah and Lydia. She was a Flick. There was Joseph Flick, had the west half of downtown, and then Deborah Flick married Myers, and Myers' name comes up a lot in Verona, and we'll talk about that too. So there were 3 siblings who were kind of essential in those early formative days. Here's our oldest picture of the Matz house. Yeah, we don't know the date. I've found when I looked up at the bricks, you can see evidence of these porches. You can still see where they were attached. All of this lines up with all these. So we're pretty sure this is the Matz house. We believe that. You'll notice something interesting. I mentioned the brown. In this old photo, are these lentils? Is that what you call the things? These things above? These lentils are ostensibly white. Look how much darker I've only ever saw it as white. So this old photograph kind of shows that at some point, these cornices were a darker color. I don't know what color they were, but they were definitely way darker than white, as you can see here. And I asked Sally about this a year and a half ago, because Troy had said, hey, I want to paint those darker. Do you think people will be upset? Well, we looked at the picture. Looks like they were darker. And I emailed Sally, and she said, hey, I like Troy's plan. Who cares what anyone thinks? It should be as close as possible, right? So this is kind of nice. And I said to Troy, I'm like, well, yeah, it looks like you have a blessing to change the color of the... But what I like is Troy was very concerned about that. So like we're going to talk about, I think you're really good caretaker of this house, and just the fact that you would be concerned about that, I think is awesome. William GL was that boy who was 4. He was one of our 106 Verona soldiers. He was one of our 3 POWs, along with Jesse Myers, who was the son of the other family I showed you there. So this is kind of a cool, helps establish relevance of the house. He grew up in there as a boy, and he's buried in our cemetery. Okay, so going back to the timeline, that cemetery, in the same year the house was built, was sold for, I think, $5, something low to the city, to become a cemetery. The Baptist church, where a lot of us will be on Monday, was donated. The land was for $1, and there was a clause saying if it ever stops being a church, it goes back to the owners. So I always joked with Sally, like, if they ever do something else, looks like you get some land coming your way. That's actually in the contract. Then the Civil War happened. William GL went off and fought, was captured, released, became very sick afterwards. And then Josiah also helped give land at a very cheap price to the Chicago Northwestern Railroad, which helped bring it to, we think likely helped bring it to Verona, which is part of the reason Verona is what it is today, I think, having a railroad come right through the middle. So sad story, Josiah died in 1883 of typhoid pneumonia. His daughter Emma, who had a 3-year-old son, also passed away about a week and a half later. So typhoid pneumonia took a lot of people back then, and it took Josiah and his daughter. And her son, her husband was Dr. Jane, who lived in where Sauzier is right now, and had a practice there later on. But her son, who's 3, ended up living to like 80-something. I had to check. Just wanted to make sure he had a nice long life after losing his mom at 3. Then, 1927, so we kind of lose track of the house from the late 1800s, early 1900s to 1927. Thank you to Laura for this. This came from a book from the Roethlisberger family history. And John, you knew Fred and Mildred. John's told me a lot about them, and he wanted to get into owning a filling station. He bought the corner, put a Phillips 66 on there, was a big Cubs fan. John told me that if you back then they actually filled your car for you, which I don't believe. I've never seen that. I think that was, no, sorry, you guys are trying to trick me again. No one ever did that. But John said when you pulled up during a big play in a Cubs game, you would just sit there. No one would come to fill your, yeah, question.
Go to Oregon, they still fill the tank.
What? They still do this in Oregon? What place in Oregon still fills the tank?
All of them.
Oregon, Wisconsin? Oregon State? Oh, the state. Okay, I was like, that's just, I'm going there right now. Wow. Is this some kind of law or something? It's gotta be.
It is a lot.
Oregon, they still fill your gas tank. Wow, that's great. Unless the Cubs are playing. Then, Fred sadly passed in 1950, and Mildred lived there, we think, until she passed in 1978. And there's their daughter, Betty, who John remembers from school. So they own the house and the corner station. Next thing, oh, by the way, Mildred was a teacher at various Verona schools. Here's her in 1928 at the Verona Graded School, which is now New Century. She's in a lot of these old pictures. That's her on the right there. So she taught school. Here's some old pictures. We don't have the dates on, but you can see the transition. That's that same porch as before, but now it's missing. This is the Walgreens side, the west side. Here's on the south side still. These match in that old photograph. So it went through various iterations. Here's kind of one of the more known pictures. Here's that porch again, but now the style's been changed. Here's the door facing Walgreens. This is the Myers house. I mentioned the brother-in-law, Jesse Myers. He actually, I forgot to say that the bricks for the Matt's house reportedly were made up on Half Mile Road by the Urbach's farm, the Urbach family farm, which is the Jack Rood farm, and before that the, who was it before that, Pete?
Jack Rood.
Jack Rood, yeah. So they also, from the same farm, that was a Myers farm, made the bricks for this, which was where Walgreens' drive-thru was up until about 2003. But it's pretty much a facsimile copy until they added that porch on the front. Here it is again, a little bit later in the 90s. Okay, Matt's house again. You can see the the cool tinsely thing across. Who knows why that was there?
Car dealership.
Car dealership, yeah. They were selling cars in front of it. You can see a little bit. There was that filling station became, I think, Suburban Motors, Suburban Wheels, and various car dealerships. So, I don't know, Trey, are you going to restore the tinsely thing across the front? And the block windows? Okay, so good. Well, good, we have this picture for you. Park a bunch of cars in front to be historically accurate. Yeah, and here it is in 77. The Historical Society of Wisconsin did a big write-up on it. There's an old Quonset-style garage in the back. You can see the side of, here's where that filling station / car dealership was there. Oh, and look, there's the, maybe the tinsely, where is that? Is Jan here? Jan is still in town. Jan Norsetter, Verona resident, still lives here, who rented this. It's been an apartment since it's been a filling station. And Jan was someone who reached out to me and gave me this picture from 1980 of the house. Okay, who knows what this is?
Well, that's the house on
The Sharp House. I mentioned the Sharp House because I think its story is important to the Matt's house. This was across Kitty Corner. This is where the bank is now on the corner, the southwest corner. And this was a Doc Sharp from 1910, 1920s. And in 87, the land was rezoned to be commercial. And people started getting upset when they realized it meant the building was going to be destroyed. There was a petition. People vowed to save it, and they didn't, sadly. So this is October 1987. Later, Hardee's came in there, which lasted about 10 years. Very sad moment, I think, for Verona history, and we kind of evoked this when we were involved with Matt's house a couple years ago. Here's some, I think some of these kids were in my class. That was in fourth grade.
Took a petition and they threw it away.
Oh, petition got thrown away, yeah. The bummer is, one of the lessons from this was, it was too late by this point. March of that year is when the rezoning happened. That's when it could have been stopped. So I tried to think with the Matt's house, we need to be involved ahead of time. When the city bought it, we needed to be involved right away, not when. I mean, I'm glad they did this, but that was kind of the lesson learned, was you gotta watch and get ahead of things. 89, someone. What's that? Oh yeah, middle school kids went and had signs and stuff. 89, someone paid to have a full write-up done on the house to get it on the National Register. They studied everything. They looked at the square nails, they looked at the bricks. And it was actually approved to go forward to end up on the National Register. It would have been our only thing in Verona on the National Register, and the trail was cold. It stopped. And I couldn't find out who filled this out. I called this agency who filled this out, and they don't have records. I talked to the owners at the time. I think they were concerned about its effect on future sales if it goes on the register, because if it's privately owned, you have to get the permission of the people who own it. But we learned a lot about it in here, and this does say that it thinks the east side was added on later, shortly after, which is something Troy's been looking at, trying to figure out there's different stones in the foundation and stuff. So these people thought it was very shortly after the east portion was added. Okay, so sorry I'm going kind of long, but 91, the house went up for sale. The city had a chance to buy it. They were going to ask $110,000. It was reduced, this is 1991, it was reduced to $75,000. Remember this picture? I love this picture. There's Ken Banke and Kathy Nelson in front of the house back in 91. City ended up, okay, there's a bunch of letters to the editor saying the city should buy it. You'll recognize this one. Yeah. Please don't let it happen to the Sharp House. If we can't afford the property, I would be grateful to see it goes to a bidder who will preserve it. Sally. Sally was very, very connected and concerned with this house's future. She always was. So I found that there. Verona offered $75,000 and they passed, and the house didn't sell. No one else offered. I don't know if there are other offers, but I don't think anyone beat that one, and it's out there. So the negotiations continued. Now let's skip ahead a year. 1992, there was a big article Jim from the paper found calling it an eyesore because the landscaping had grown up and was kind of out of control. You can see there's kind of a thing there. The owners were still trying to sell it, and it kind of makes sense. The argument was, well, if we sell it to someone, if we do a bunch of landscaping, we sell it, and someone just scrapes it all off, it's kind of a waste of time. Yeah, Stu.
Who were the owners?
The owners were Jim Schmidt and Bob Fahey. They had bought it, I think, in '78 after Mildred died, Roethlisberger died, and they had owned the car lot, various iterations of it. If I say anything wrong, someone correct me, by the way.
You're right.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So it kind of sat there for a bit because they were still trying to sell it. There were some articles written that people should volunteer and clean up the area, but I don't think anyone actually did. So, but then it did become a business. Who remembers House of Flowers, 1996? Yeah. This is the part of Verona history I'm starting to remember now, which I like. So one of these is Bob Fahey's wife. I talked to him 2 years ago. She had worked at a flower shop. I think she'd won an award for flower work she had done. And her and 2 other ladies teamed up to turn the Matt's house into a flower shop. Here are some of the renovations. So I guess this will be interesting for Troy because you can see them putting in some of the stuff that he's been changing. Here's the inside at the time. It had been an apartment. Here's the kitchen. And here's the wall, which has become part of the city's interest, this part of land there. Here they are putting it in. Some more pictures of it being redone. Inside, drop ceiling, and flower shop. And there it is, House of Flowers, late 90s. Skip ahead to 2003. Here's that Myers house I talked about, with the Myers family still there. Here is the Matt's house, House of Flowers sign. I think the business got sold. It got moved down north to another house and eventually out to the south side of town. Carl Curtis took this picture in 2003, and just 3 years later, Jim Verley took this picture because the town had changed so much. You can see now Walgreens, Myers house is gone, the bank is there. You can even see the Hardys. Whoops. You can even see the Hardys in this, the old closed down Hardys. So here we go. We're 2006. We're getting close to a normal day. This is Lori's picture. Lori, were you just going through Verona, kind of on sightseeing, or what led you to?
I was going to write a blog on Verona, and
Yeah.
I just happened to pick that time to go and get pictures.
Yeah.
There it was.
There it was. She was going to write a blog on Verona, she said, and she just came through to take pictures, and there it is. I'm glad you caught this because I remember I didn't know anything about the house at the time, but I remember seeing this and being like, oh, that's kind of funny. if you can move it free building. So it sat there. Eventually, the city had a plan, or has a plan, to increase the intersection, a right turn lane there. And you can kind of see on this picture, here's the current, this is where they need for their plan, going right up to here. So in the city, it would have had to do some eminent domain or something to buy this or somehow acquire that. But the opportunity presented itself. The house was for sale again in 2015. The city purchased it for $150,000, and they have the whole thing now. They didn't really want or need a house. They just kind of need the intersection. So now what do we do with it? And that's where the more modern. A local architect went through and did. Luke, let me know if I get anything wrong here. If I mistake anything, I'm doing this all from memory. So one of our elders is here. Thanks, Luke, for coming. There was some estimates done for just to stop the decay, $50,000, $500,000. And this, to me, as someone who got involved right about then, this number was the death knell for this house. The $1 million house, people were calling it. And I mean, an estimate, as I'm sure Troy can say, is a subjective thing. I could spend $1 million on my house right now, and I could do stuff. What do you want it to become? This was for making it top to bottom, like office space, usable space in the attic, redoing basically everything, lifting it, replacing the foundation for 160 grand. This was just to keep the leaking from happening. So there was a very sad city council meeting where they talked about it, and I mean, it kind of makes sense. We have this house, we don't have use for it, it's gonna be $1 million. Let's see if people want it. And Adam, the planner, got 6 inquiries, all from businesses who wanted to destroy it and just use the lot for something. So it was kind of heading that direction. I got this email from my alder, Heather, asking for people's opinions. And then this ran on August 2015, that it was not looking good for the Matt's house. Here's, the alders toured it. At the time, there was water in the basement because some of the downspouts had fallen off and water was just falling in there. So it was in really sad condition. When, Luke, did you get to tour it? Were you on that tour too, or?
No, I saw it other times, though.
You saw pictures and things.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I can kind of see why you would come to this conclusion if you go there and you see all this water everywhere and it's gonna be $1 million. And so, this for me was one of my life-changing moments. You have those moments you point at going in, I met Ruth, I met Sally, and we talked about it, and that's when Sally said, oh yeah, one of our Civil War veterans grew up. I was like, one of our what? It was kind of fun learning all this history. And we went there and said, hey, let's just hold off because we have to figure some things out. These were the questions we had to answer. Is the house relevant? Do we have other old houses from the 1840s? We don't. We have some from the late 1800s in the downtown area, but that's it. Will it really cost $1 million? We met with a ton of contractors to say, well, the estimate had 50 grand for replacing the roof. Someone said they could do it for 20. The estimate had $140,000 to replace the foundation. Xander said they could seal it for 14,000. So like I started to see this number come down, which makes it a little more realistic. You could say, do people want it saved? This is where all you came in. So we made a Facebook page. We got people to write letters. Luke had told me he got 10 emails from people in his district, which is amazing, because I think that's how people, our city government, I feel, is very receptive to people who actually take the time to talk out. How will it be used? We had some ideas. I thought for a while maybe we could buy it. You know, I didn't know how big our society was, and I didn't really know what the effort took, but we could turn it into some kind of mini community center or a little museum we've been hoping for so long. And a lot of these things became the common, like what people would say around town, which we had to refute, which is, oh, the history's all gone. It's gone, there's nothing left in there. Well, bricks are still there. There's some original flooring in there. The outside's kind of the most important part of the historic house. It's too crumbled, it can't be saved. Isn't that thing falling apart? Well, the old house is 160 years, it's gonna have some cracks in it, right? So here we are, there's Sally and Alan at Miller's. We had little flyers. I like how Alan is sitting by the candy. Facebook page, people responded, they lit up Facebook, they wrote emails. Not as many people wrote emails as lit up Facebook, so we tried to convert that to this. Yeah, we got to be in the paper. There's Sally with her. Sally made these Save the Matt's House shirts. I love those. They're so cute. I'm too big. I didn't fit this, my bad. But, or I have one on there too. You can't fit me into a shirt. So we were in the press in October of 2015. And raise your hand if you're in this. Who's there? Anyone in this picture is here today? I think, Bev, you're in there. There's Ruth. Mike Hankert is kind of a local, he fixes up, he moved the house from Miller's over to become the branded image. He's a contractor, he's a general contractor. He became our reference for talking to contractors about what do we need to replace the foundation? Do we need to, he was essential in keeping going. There's my little boy there. So we talked to the city, and then this was our big happy moment. We asked, hey, all we really think it needed was a patch over the leaky roof and some work in the northwest corner. And they approved it to $5,000. I think they only spent a couple $100 on it, putting some shingles on, if I remember correctly. And this was kind of a big thing where people showed up. So this is the power of us, everyone showing up and saying, hey, let's slow this down a little bit. Here's our Grieber Masonry was out there looking at the foundation, giving us estimates, and everyone commented on how nice the foundation looked when we had people come out. The common knowledge was that it was crumbling and falling apart, but they said 160 years, there should be boulders falling out of this. There should be collapses, and there was none of that. So that kind of helped us change the dialogue. Here's Sally. We were on TV in January of 2016 on Channel 3, right around the time another city council meeting was working. This was a big change. Sorry, I know I'm going along with this. We had Jim Drager from the Historical Society come out with Ellsworth Brown. And they kind of helped fill in some of the holes about how hard it is to save and sustain a house, what you pay for maintenance every year, how many people you need. And this was kind of the moment where I realized, and I just met Troy a couple months before, who, I mean, he'll talk about his experience with the Stam house and everything. This is where we started to realize, like, you need to save a house on your own. you need to have like a dozen people doing fundraising year-round, doing maintenance. You need to staff it. And I started to realize this is too big of a project. So that's when I started to think, well, there's this other person who has done this and is good at this and cares about the house. So, and that led to a couple city council meetings I'll skip over, where there was another guy who wanted to kind of pick it up, move it, rotate it, and Troy showed up and talked about fixing it up, keeping the outside from looking how it was. Our big victory from this, I believe, Bill Burns, the city administrator, had suggested, well, you know, sometimes people do deed restrictions, which means it's a legal document that says you can't destroy the building. And maybe you could talk about that, and we thought, this is great. So we kind of kept that in everyone's ears and minds, and that ended up becoming a legal document when Troy took over the house. So there's now a protection on that house that says you cannot demolish it, and you would need a judge to break that. Yeah?
Whose name did you just mention? The one that said that you could do a deed restriction? Who said that?
That was Bill Burns, the city administrator, which I was very thankful he brought that up. I hadn't heard that before. I mean, save the house or anything. And,
I heard the name, but because you have an auctioneer's voice, I
oh, sorry. I know. I get excited.
That's why I'm asking
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
Now,
And
just
definitely,
for real.
I appreciate it. Yeah, let me know if I definitely go too fast. Yeah, so Bill Burns was our city
When did this
administrator.
happen? Who was there? Were you there?
Yeah, this was, so this was early 2016, or yeah, 2016. And we had met with, I'd met with Troy personally. We'd gone to the house with Adam, our city planner, Bill Burns, our city administrator, and contractors. And it was becoming apparent that this was too big a project for a small historical society. There's guys from the State Historical Society, they're used to taking over these houses all the time from little ones that fail. So they were kind of like, you probably don't want to do this unless you have a couple dozen people dedicated to work on it all the time. Yeah, so Bill had suggested deed restriction, and that ended up going into the document. So that's there, and that's one of the, I think our true victory of all this is Bill suggesting that and then people sticking to that. And then the deal closed, October, and this is one of my last slides before I head off to Troy. So Troy was selected, and the house is going to be in his care, and he'll tell you about the plan, but I consider this is a very happy day. After, you go back a year earlier where it looked like 6 people wanted to knock it down, and here we are handing over with a protection to someone who's going to take care of it. And so you have 160 years of Matt's House history in 15 minutes. It would have been 20 if I talked slower, so, yeah, question?
Never let it be said that a few people, a core of people,
Yeah.
can always change the future, because I've seen it so many times,
Right.
because I'm an advocate myself.
Thank you so much. So he said, if you can't hear him in the back, I've never doubt that a few people, yeah, hooray, can't change something. And for me, what I've learned in this experience, I never did any social activism or anything before this, is taking that jump from complaining about something on Facebook to doing something. It looks like the Grand Canyon, but it's actually just a step. And once you take it, it becomes easier. And people, I'm really proud of the people who talked to elders, sent emails, called, because that's really how, like you said, that's how things happen. And it's not as hard as it looks. You just have to take a little jump. So yeah, questions you guys have?
And look how many people you have in this room now
Yeah.
that care about this house.
Right, and it all came from this. Did I get anything wrong, by the way? Someone correct me. I'm sure I said at least one thing wrong that someone knows. Is there something wrong? Any other questions or comments before we hand it over to Troy?
Thanks to you, Jesse.
Well, thank you, Joe. I appreciate that. And Sally, Ruth, the people who were so encouraging from the very start, because when you have people telling you, what? Isn't that the $1 million house that's crumbling? And it's like having someone like Sally who's always smiling and saying, hey, this is great. Yeah. So cool. Yeah, well, if you guys want to grab some banana bread, pumpkin bread or coffee, I'm going to flip over to Troy's PowerPoint. All right, everyone, without further ado, so we kind of left off at the moment where the city council and Troy signed a contract to take over the house and take care of it. And I'd like to, I don't think many people have met Troy Ross. He lives on the south side of town. Our kids go to the same school. It was very fun getting to know him and meet him, but everyone, Troy.
Thank you for having me. I didn't expect as many people to be here, so I'm a little nervous, so cut me some slack. Usually I work by myself all day, so I'm not used to all these people. So I have a partner. We buy properties that come up that look really interesting, that nobody else wants. It's all like properties. I thought I'd show you, they alluded to the Stam House in the paper, so I thought I'd tell you a little bit about that. This is in Middleton, built in 1847. It's kind of Middleton's pride and joy, sort of like Matt's house is yours. We purchased it in 2013 from Anchor Bank in foreclosure. We worked with the city there, really fantastic as well, to restore it. So This is the building in 1925. This is our oldest picture.
I'm okay.
It was built in 3 sections.
I am okay.
This is the original portion of the building. And then there was a back portion added a little bit later, and then this portion. So kind of between 1847 and 1851. I'm going to take you through sort of the progression of the building. This is 1947. This has been its 100-year mark. You can start to see that there's parging on this side. They've covered up a window. There's a nice dog. And then by the 50s, it's starting to look a little rougher. 73, they moved the kitchen and completely parged over the front. They added this porch, which caused a lot of water issues in this corner. Then they put wood over this. And this is 2013, so it doesn't look a lot like what it used to look like. So we started, we took it all off. This is a big risk for us, but we felt like it was the right thing to do. See it come down. And I started taking this porch off. Now the porch is gone. Now we're starting to put it back together. We open that window back up, which was a door actually. The old days when they had sleeping porches and stuff like that. You can see there's some little wood blocks right there. And there was a porch that used to be over that too. We don't have an idea of what it looked like because we don't have a picture that old. We blocked that in and put the windows in. That we found a window like this buried in the wall, so we felt good about it. And this is where it is today. This is on Century Avenue in Middleton. There's a picture from the front. This sign is a replica of the one that used to be there in the 40s. So this is the upstairs when we bought it. It had about 3 layers of paneling, and this ceiling height would have been about 8 feet. And you can see we took all the paneling down, exposed the stone. This ceiling is about 14 feet now. There were 3 ceilings there. We replaced there were ceilings, there had been a ceiling there that had been covered up since the 30s, because we could tell, yeah.
How many people did you have tearing, structurally removing parts of the house?
Well, there's about 3 of us for a while, and then we added 2 more guys, so the key for these things is to keep the budgets low. You throw a bunch of people at it and it just doesn't work. You know, it doesn't get it done as fast as you might like, but that's the key. We put all new modern furnaces, all new wiring, all new electrical. It's modernized except for the stone. The stone is in great shape. Right here you can see how I was saying there's 2 different portions of that front building. This is the second part. You can see the stone is different here, right? It's much more of a very utilitarian sort of style of masonry. This is the first floor. This is the bar. This is one we did on East Johnson. We purchased this in 2008. It was pretty bad. Here's kind of the oldest picture we have on that one. This is the 70s. This is where it is today. So it's a cute little restaurant, about 1,000 square feet. I love that we saved the ceiling. That's the original tin ceiling, you know. It was a lot of work because there's an apartment above and we had to make sure there was like fire barriers and all this kind of stuff. But I mean, to have that whole ceiling like that was just one of the things I fell in love with the building over was that ceiling, believe it or not. So, and here it is today. So it's called 4-quarter. So here's Matt's house. So I have some questions that hopefully are kind of fun, but to think about in perspective with. Let's call buildings that are historic, but not like so historic that it's obvious to people when they built it and all along. So say the Capitol or these buildings that everybody knows there's unlimited budgets and they're going to be cared for in that way. Most houses are, you don't know they're necessarily historic, right? So how many of you view your house as a historic house to be? No, nobody does, right? How many of you repair and upgrade your house with only original high-quality materials? Right? If you have a leaky sink, you don't go through and properly cut out that piece of subfloor and maybe go all the way back to the 8-foot panel mark and, right, you fix stuff, right? If you build a house, how many didn't have a budget? Unlimited means, right? Nobody does, right? And how many of you insist on leaving all the original details of your house? So the 70s house still has that great shag carpet, right? And the brown paneling and, right, that kind of faux walnut trim and all that kind of stuff? No, it goes away, right? So the Matt's house, yeah.
Technically, what is the state definition? When does a house become historic?
Well, why don't we get to that a little bit later, okay? I think the thing about the Matt's house, just so I don't lose my train of thought, is you go through these old buildings, be it Stam House or East Johnson or Matt's house, there's just this long progression. You can see people remodel things change. I get a lot of questions, well, is this original? And what's original? And luckily with Matt's house, a lot of the exterior is original, or at least pretty darn old, right? We don't know what original is because we don't have that old picture, right? But for the inside, I'm going to show you some more pictures. You just know that people lived there. Life happened, right? And they knew that when they built that house, they loved the house, but the original builder, you know, he had a budget. And he made compromises, and he used the best materials they could afford, and he used the best construction methods at the time, and he made mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, and they did the best they could. But ultimately they left a really great example of a period house. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the exterior today. That's kind of where we are, and I thought maybe if you liked it well enough, you'd have me back for some interior stuff in 6 months or something like that. But, so this is our oldest known picture, right? And this is one Jesse was showing. I did a little bit of learning about how black and white pictures, when you take those pictures with the old film, how the colors change, right? So we know that's a red brick, but it comes out white. There's a really interesting, some articles on that. But I feel pretty good that this is definitely dark. This is a column off the front of the building. That looks brown to me. So I felt good about it, changing that color. And this is kind of where we are right now. To me, what that does is it takes the emphasis off the trim and every rusty nail, and every time a bird puts a nest there or does something bad to the building, you know, and instead it puts your attention to the brick. Because we know the brick is original. It was made in Verona, and there's so much interesting stuff about it because it has a much more handmade feel to it, right? It's organic. It's not made perfectly in a modern kiln anymore. There's a lot of color variation, which is fascinating. You have bricks from on the dark red side to the red side to the orange side. And how did that happen with just one plot of land out there? I'd be fascinated to know, was it different kiln temperatures or different batches? I don't know, someone who knows that would be really, so that was one of the things we really talked about with our mason, was like, we found some red brick that we could use to substitute, but we didn't have orange. So a lot of what they did was we had degraded orange bricks, and they crushed them, made a powder or paste basically, and then used it to go over the brick to seal all the holes, but also bring some of that orange back in. So otherwise you would have seen, you know, where this whole swath or something like that, where everything's red, and then all of a sudden you start to see color. So we really tried to do that blend and get it right. One thing I think is really interesting to note, we talked a lot about these right here, and they were all really cracked. And we thought, oh, hey, these are stone. The stone's damaged. We start to get under there, and you realize, well, they weren't stone. They were just kind of a veneered with concrete over the top of brick. And what happened was they had a piece of 1/4-inch iron that they used as a header on top of the, so I'm going to take one step back. When you build a window out like this, they bricked it and they put the wood on the inside, a really heavy 2-inch by, it's a 10-inch board. It's called a buck. The buck carries a lot of the structure, and it's also what you build the window around. And then you have this piece of 1/4-inch steel that they used as a header to try to carry that weight, right? And normally we were thinking, well, this is a big piece of stone, that's carrying that weight, right? Well, it turned out it was just this quarter-inch piece of iron. So it's one of the compromises they made. They did real stone for these, but here they tried to get by without such a big piece of, and let's, over that many years, that piece of iron, which wasn't steel, right? Steel didn't come until Carnegie created steel, right? So it's iron, it degraded. And that's where a lot of the cracks that we had coming from is because it was just a piece of flat steel. So what we did is we went through and we put in angle irons. So a 90, just like that. And that carries that load now. And we ground that out. And now we got proper headers. Now what we did on top of here, we could have replaced this with stone, but that wouldn't have been original. And that wouldn't have shown the true sort of questions and compromises that someone had to make at that time. We would have over-improved it. So what we did was we floated basically a piece of EFIS of foam, and that floats there. It'll handle the winter and the freezing and thawing and expansions. It'll keep the water out, but it also covers that piece of angle iron, so you don't see that ugly thing. But the angle iron is really what's keeping the building from pushing out and going down. So that was one of those things that, you know, you just don't necessarily appreciate why those guys were out there so long on those scaffoldings, but it was a lot of that kind of stuff. These are the windows. This is one that was on the back, and it happens to have that same window that Stanhouse loved. And I just love that window. I think it's really unique. So we use that going forward. This is a little bit more of the masonry repair. This is that very worst corner on the Walgreens side. And you can see what they did is they started to grind out mortar joints, grind down brick faces where they could, and build it back up. You can see these guys did a lot of work grinding out all this so they could re-tuck point it and get in proper mortar. I'm not a mason, but it's a lime-based mortar that if you put the wrong mortar in, it's too strong for the brick. It'll actually cause the brick to shatter over time, right? So it was important. I got these great masons, and they're quirky dudes, but let me tell you, they do their stuff. So this is another, one of the big problems we had is, over time, the grade of Matt's house increased. And this right here is a wooden header, right? Where there's old window wells down there. So when you raise the grade, you put dirt against that wooden header, the header rots, right? And that's what happened. That's why we had a lot of the issues. So you can see up here, stuff began to sink. We had about 5 of those windows and a door. The other thing we had was on the Walgreens side where the corner was the worst. I should have taken more pictures, but they put a coal chute in there in the like right around 1900. There was a big circle thing in the basement that you could flap, had a flap, and then there was a chute on the outside they could just shovel it down in, right? When they did it, they probably did the best job they could, but they shifted a rock, a long rock, outside. So now that we didn't have a flush foundation anymore, we had a flush foundation and then this rock that stuck out like that or something. And what it was like a spatula. Every time it froze and thawed, that rock would freeze and raise and lower. And over 100 years, that spatula effect caused the brick above to degrade and fall apart. So that was one of those things the guys went down and dug it out, did all this stuff on the foundation side so that it's a nice smooth foundation now. We won't have those issues. Here you can see again, we got rid of that wood header and put in a nice steel angle iron there. So this is Jesse in the basement. You can see our cracks, right? This is that, right over here, this is the chimney. You can see right here, there's a lot of stuff going on. But generally it looks really good. And this is kind of due to those window wells we talked about. We went through and this is called parging, where basically you go through and just tuck point it by pushing mortar into all the joints. A lot of you can go back and you can see, a lot of the foundation stones aren't necessarily beautiful. Some of them are. And so we tried to keep some detail down there. There it goes. So they kept some fun stuff out there. So people could go down and see these big stones too. But this is also a lime-based mortar, so it breathes. Those old buildings were never meant to have entertainment rooms down there, right? They were meant for some storing, and they were meant for, you know, canning and putting your coal or whatever down there. So this really shouldn't be a wall that someone frames up and puts plastic over and hides. This is a wall that's got to breathe, and this is the right kind of mortar so that it has that lime in it that lets the back and forth happen, right? It lets the movement happen to some extent. So now this wall we thought was just beautiful, and it was in great shape. So this would be the gas station side. So we left it. So the exterior goals really are to properly repair and stabilize the structure, and leave as many historic details intact as possible, and to try to not make the exterior look perfect, and to make it and not make it better than original. You know, what we did a lot was with that crushed brick, we could go back in and fill the little voids, and it's really fascinating. I stumbled across this mason. A lot of masons don't want to do this kind of work because it's putsy. They can't bid it out. It's a time and materials kind of thing, you know. A lot of time on a scaffolding, you know, with angle grinders. It's dirty. But that's what they did, is they went and they filled these voids. Instead of cutting all those bricks out or making it look perfect, there's still, you can go up there and say, hey, this is an old building. Look at the character of these bricks. So anyways, that's kind of was the goals there. For the interior, I'll give you some stuff here. Most of the interior has seen repeated remodeling and gutting since it was built. It's unclear if any of the interior details were original to 1848, but there's at least 4 different generations of woodwork. There's one in that front parlor that was really beautiful, but even that woodwork was pine. So Matt's house family, they still had to make some concessions, right? They didn't put oak in there. They went with a nice painted pine or a stained pine or whatever. If that was original, we don't know, right? Imagine if you go and gut your house, do you keep the trim? Especially if it's pine, because you know pine, you take that off, it breaks, it's hard. It's hard to say, you know, what's left. With the ceilings and walls, there are multiple signs of several ceilings and wall demolitions. And the plaster that was on the brick, there's at least 6 different surfaces, so we couldn't blend it in any way. So I have a trivia question. Jesse, you can't answer because you know. What's this pipe in the ceiling?
It's gas.
It's black, it's pipe, it's about 1/2 inch.
Electrical conduit?
Nope.
Gas?
Gas, that's right, gas lights.
Oh.
So they had one piece they left in here first. So we know this ceiling was gutted, what, 1890 or 1900, right? To get that type of lighting in the first, right?
So would that have kerosene in it?
Isn't that natural gas when they use gas lights?
They didn't have natural
They didn't
gas.
have that.
No, in the turn of the century.
Yeah, they had gas lights before electric lights. Yeah. No, but it was some sort of gas.
It wasn't natural gas.
It was a gas though. And we can learn more about that, but there was the gas lights when you flicked them on. So that's what this was.
Still had to light them, did you?
Yeah, that's right, and they're very dangerous. So. Oh yeah, we're leaving it in. Yeah, why take it out? It'll be fun for the next guy to find. Okay. Well, really, it's not hurting us. I mean,
Why did you say that a lot?
Put a label in there so he knows what it is.
yeah, well, what are these?
Now they may not know.
Knob and tube, that's right. This is the first wiring, right? So you only had positive and neutral wires. You didn't have a ground. In the old days, they didn't really understand load, electrical load. So you'd have a whole bunch of positives going out, and they'd all come back on one neutral. So, but this is when you ran a radio and a couple light bulbs.
Is that what they call a positive ground?
No, I don't think so. There's no ground basically on this stuff. They would try and cheat it later and hook it to like your plumbing sacks and stuff like that and grab a ground that way, but no. So we know that ceiling was gutted somewhere around 1900 or maybe before or a little after to do all the gas lights, right, in the whole building. And then we can see, like, there was knob and tube still running the ceiling of the first floor when we bought it, so it was still hot. We know that ceiling was gutted, and the entire interior was gutted, 1920, because that's about the time period of knob and tube. So there really isn't any interior walls that would have been original left, nothing. And my guess is, and this is very amateur guess, but probably a lot of the walls would have been wooden, and ceilings would have been wooden in the 1840s, is my guess. I would have to do some more research on that. But now, I think like this is original. I left this to show you. This is a joint above the stairwell, which is neat with the peg. But it goes to show you, like, when you think about if you've gutted a house, do you keep your trim? If you gut it, it's awfully hard, right? It's a lot of work to remove that trim, especially if you had 4 or 5 coats of paint on it. You'd probably yank it, if it was an expensive trim at the time, and you put some more trim up, and you try and upgrade. But we had a lot of the vast majority of the windows were simple 1x4s put on with a 1x4 on top, not any detail. That front parlor was the only place, and we're going to try and look at how to use some of that trim. This is the original newel post. I'm not going to say original, but it's old. And you can see some of the fun details on the steps. I have a better picture of that. The steps aren't to code, so if I would tear those steps down, I'd have to end up doing some sort of angled code to get your 8x11 tread. So we're gonna save these steps, but we got to figure out how to do it. This is a 36-inch newel post, and that's not legal for a commercial building. So we'll do a 42, and I'm working with the Amish. I'm going to have them replicate some newel posts based on this one that we can use for the upstairs too. That'll be 42, and we'll put that somewhere fun. You can see the fun details here. These we uncovered when we took kind of the stuff out of when it was a apartment, but it's fun that's still there. So our interior goals are really save, repair, and recreate any historic interior details, and repair and replace the outdated systems and structural issues. We're actually going to expose, we've actually done it, we've exposed all the brick on the inside. I talked about the plaster, like some of the plaster had like a 70s thing going on with all these, almost was like lava, just all over the place. Some of it was smooth, some of it was just, lots and lots of peeling wallpaper, painted over. So what we ended up doing, we took all that off and we ground it down to the brick. So there's this hard question with preservationists. They'd say, well, that should go back to plaster the way it was. My feeling is the best thing we can do for that building is create a financially feasible building. I'm not going to own it forever. This building has a lifetime longer than all of us. So let's make this building work. The brick that's on the inside was never meant to be seen. And I think that's kind of what's neat about it. They would have left little bumps. So when they plastered it, it had something to catch, right? It's kind of fun to see it. And I think you guys will go in there and you'll see like 10 different chimney openings. Because every room had a potbelly stove. I mean, can you imagine your kid's room having a hot potbelly stove? But that's what they did to heat those buildings, So there's a lot of fun things that you can see, that you can appreciate the trade and the craft that went into the building. Down the road, if this becomes, or they want to make it back into a museum and say, hey, this is the way it was, this is the way a family lived, like we went to see President Grant's house down in Illinois, right? Everything's the same, right? You could do that. We haven't done any harm to the building. You could put the walls back up, you could replaster, and it could be that living museum if there was ever that. But for now, I think exposing that brick really invites the public in more and makes it a more viable space. So that's kind of where I am right now. I want to bring you guys pictures of the interior when we get along with it. The big focus right now is to get it all closed up and looking nice for the winter. Hustling to get the windows in and get it painted. We're going to pour some stoops on the outside. But we're gonna work with the city also to figure out, you know, the retaining wall. It sounds like there might be some facade grants or something, and I wanna put the time into that so we do something that's fun. I think it's kind of a neat corner. It sounds like there might be some interest in having some civic pride on that corner, and, you know, obviously, doing something wood and cheap is different than doing something with masonry, and I'd like to just engage the city in that. And I wanted to make sure that the city sees that a lot's getting done before they're asked to, hey, do you want to put a little more into this, you know? So I'm hoping with the brick, especially the paint now, they start to say, hey, I think at this point, the thing that's people should know too is that the structure is now saved as far as the structural issues, you know, and that was a lot of money and a lot of stuff that people don't necessarily, they don't necessarily appreciate because you don't see it, you know. Now all the cosmetic stuff, people are gonna say, wow, they're almost done, you know, and that's not the case either. So now we go through the inside and just sort of meticulously say, okay, how do we save these steps? You know, like the way they build steps now is different. Now you cut your 2x12 and you have stringers, right? Well, the way those steps are, they're actually kind of put together in a different way. You start taking one tread off and the whole darn thing might just fall apart. So it's almost like, okay, how do I make these old steps look nice and fix these steps? Because some of them have chunks out of them, you know. And it's a long process, so we told the city we'd try to be done in 18 months. I think we're gonna be close, but a lot of it's gonna be saying, okay, the give and take. How, you know, we can do this relatively inexpensively because it'll be me and maybe one or two other guys, depending on how it goes, you know. If you throw a bunch of people in a building, that's different. Then the cash goes up. But like Stam House, it took 2 years. But I think we got a much better building. Middleton had a $2 million bid to do that, and they didn't do nearly as much as we did. You know, so I think with Matt's house too, we're gonna get the outside looking really nice, so it's not an eyesore. And then we're just gonna take the time to do the inside, so it's done right. So that's kind of, well, that's where we are right now. So, and that's what I got for you. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I just want to tell you on behalf of the Matz family, because I'm the only one here today, I want to thank you for all the hard work
Oh,
that
sure.
you've done,
Thank you.
and it's going to mean a lot to us when you get it all finished.
I appreciate
So I just
that.
want to
Thank
thank
you.
you very much
Thanks
for
for
that.
coming.
Because I've gone by and seen all the things that you've done, and I'm very impressed.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So, just
I
wanted to
appreciate
let you know.
that.